for another top 10 video. I was on vacation last week, so I didn't have a chance to put out a poll for my patrons to vote on, so I decided myself what it's going to be. And it's going to be my top 10 first level spells. Are you ready to piss off probably the whole internet? Because I know I am, because one, there is no way that someone's not going to tell me they don't like what's on this list. But two, I'm throwing out top 10 and I'm giving you a top 15 because I did a top 8 and a top 9. So let's kind of make up for it a little bit with a top 15 first level spells. There's a lot of them. There's no way I'm going to make everybody happy, but I'm at least getting that out up front. Stay tuned. I don't have a bit. What's going on, folks? Ted from Nerd Immersion here. Let's talk what the rules are. Pretty simple. Got to be a first level spell. First level official spell, not including Unearthed Arcana. That does mean it's going to cover the entire list of every spell released, so that'll get the new spells in Xanathar's Guide and Elemental Evil, the new spells from Explorer's Guide to Wildmount, as well as Acquisitions Incorporated. For the most part, it's also going to encompass the ones from the Lost Laboratory of Kowalish as well. Not too many from the extended books, but enough that it's worth mentioning. I realized I don't have cards for anything but 1 through 10, so number 15. Detect Magic. I struggled a lot with putting this on the list because I do recognize that it's an immensely powerful and useful spell, but I don't like that it's something that you have to choose. I kind of feel like if you look at this list, Bard, Cleric, Sorcerer, Ranger, Paladin, Wizard, Artificer, it's on everybody's list except for Warlock, because Warlock can get an invocation to get it at will. But that being said, if everyone has an option to take it, this is a thing I feel like should almost not be a spell or should be a given to everybody, right? Even if it's everyone has this on their spell list permanently, but they can only cast it as a ritual and then they have to choose to take it as a chosen spell to cast it as an action, I'd be okay with that. And that's actually how I'm leaning in my games. If you can cast magic, I feel like you should be able to detect it. So that's why I put it at the very bottom of this list. But anyway, it lets you see a magical aura around you, concentration for 10 minutes, and you can focus in to determine the aura, the type of school of magic, and it can be blocked by certain things. Again, I also should say this is, again, my top 10 list, so it's probably going to piss somebody off that I didn't put what they deem is the most powerful as number 1. Number 14. Ice Knife. I really like this spell. My biggest detriment to Ice Knife is the limited spell list that has access to it, which is Druid, Sorcerer, and Wizard. I feel like it's dumb to not include it on the Warlock spell list, but whatever. And I put this on the list because it is, I think, one of the best first level spells out there for damage. There are obviously better ones that do certain amounts of damage, like Chromatic Orb does 3d8, Burning Hands does 2d6 or 3d6 in a radius, but I like this one because it has multiple damage types and it can do a fair amount of AoE for a first level spell. So it's an action, it has a range of 60 feet, and you throw out a dagger. So I also like it because it is an attacking spell. There are very few spells that use attack rolls in 5th edition. This is one. You pick a target. You attack that target, which does mean that this has the opportunity to crit as you throw this. It is a ranged spell attack. So if you have anything that alters ranged spell attacks, that applies here. It does a d10 piercing damage. So if you crit, it would do 2d10 piercing damage, and then hit or miss, it then explodes, and that target and each creature within 5 feet of them makes a dexterity saving throw, or they take 2d6 cold damage. Something that I'm realizing just now as I'm reading this is they don't take half on a success. I missed that part about Ice Knife, and I've been running it the wrong way for almost 5 years, and I'm realizing that as I'm making this video. So I might not have put it as high on this list because you don't take half damage if you succeed, but that could hit, what is it, up to 8 additional people plus the initial target with the explosion. And cold damage is relatively, it's not like it's fire damage, which is or poison, very heavily resisted. And you can upcast it to add an additional d6 to the damage of the explosion. I wish it kind of added damage to the piercing damage up front as well, or maybe if it was 2d6 for each level above first. But either way, I also just really like Ice Knife as a spell. I think it has a cool image in my mind, but especially considering we had Flame Blade and Ice Knife and now Shadow Blade, I think we could, again, as I've stated before, have other cool elemental blade spells, which is something I'd like to see added later on, maybe this year in 5th edition. Number 13. Guiding Bolt. It is, once again, another one that is limited by the spell list, but that is only really available to Cleric. It has options for, again, Oath of Glory and Celestial. Warlock can gain access to this, but it is just a really good spell. I feel like it loses something when you start upcasting it, but as a first level spell, it's pretty powerful. So one, it has a range of 120 feet, which is nice. It's a pretty long distance. It is one of the very few, again, attacking spells in the game, one of the very few attacking spells that a cleric has access to. And then it does 4d6 damage for a first level spell. Again, compared to other spells like a Chromatic Orb dealing 3d8, this does on average close to that. It can crit because it's an attacking roll, and it has a really nice benefit. If you hit, the next attack roll made against that target before the end of your next turn has advantage, thanks to the mystical light gathering around the target. So this can be very useful for fishing for crits. This can be useful to give a rogue sneak attack if they didn't have it previously. And again, it's radiant damage too, which is, again, if not the most, it's right up there with, I think, force damage for the least amount of creatures are resistant. I know Celestials are typically immune, but again, very powerful. And I have very fond memories of actually getting this on a multi-class Bard Cleric, and at 3rd level, casting a Guiding Bolt and critting, and blowing the DM's mind that I did 8d6 damage with a first level spell at level 3. Like, it just blew their mind. And again, I have very fond memories of that, which is why I made sure to put it on the list. Because again, single target fireball level damage that, if you crit, obviously can't be dodged. I'm a big fan of. Number 12. Dissonant Whispers. Once again, I return to that Bard character that I mentioned from before. This was another very powerful spell, and one of the first characters I got to play in 5th edition had access to some Bard spells, and then later on I actually got to play a Bard, and this was kind of a really good, powerful go-to move for me, because it is a 60-foot range, and it's psychic damage, which is pretty cool. You whisper something to a creature, rack their brain with pain, and what's nice is they don't need to understand a language for this to work. If they're deafened, it doesn't work, but it's not like other spells where you're whispering or using things like suggestion or command, where they need to be able to understand a language. It does, if they fail, it does 3d6 psychic damage, and they must immediately use their reaction, if possible, to move as far away from you as they're able to. It doesn't move into obviously dangerous ground, like it doesn't jump into a pit or a fire. And then again, unlike Ice Knife, like I learned now, on a successful save, the target takes half damage and doesn't move away. It can also be upcast to add to the d6s, but in my mind, what makes it so powerful is the reaction to move away, because that will prompt opportunity attacks. So that is very powerful, because the first time that I used this, again, I had a party of very heavy melee fighters, and I cast Dissonant Whispers on a guy that was fighting me. He had to not only run away from me, but actually almost run a gauntlet through the rest of my teammates. Therefore, everybody getting attacks on them and decimating this foe before he managed to get to his movement speed away. Number 11. Jim's Magic Missile. I've only actually gotten to cast this on one character in all of my games, and I very much enjoyed it, though it didn't do what I'd hoped. This was added in the Acquisitions Incorporated book, and it's very much what that is. Jim's Magic Missile. If you're familiar with Acquisitions Incorporated, you're familiar with Jim Dark Magic, and I'll explain my thoughts on it in a second here. So, first level, one action spell out to 120 feet. We all know how a regular Magic Missile is done, but this says any apprentice wizard can cast a boring old Magic Missile. Sure, it always strikes its target. Yawn. Do away with the drudgery of your grandfather's magic with this improved version as used by Jim Dark Magic. You create 3 twisting, whistling, hypoallergenic, gluten-free darts of magical force. Each dart targets a creature of your choice that you can see within range, again 120 feet. Make a ranged spell attack for each missile. Again, one of the very few abilities that lets you cast, again, using an attack roll. On a hit, a missile deals 2d4 damage to that target. So that's better than a base magic missile. If the attack roll scores a critical hit, the target of the missile takes 5d4 force damage instead of you rolling twice. So instead of rolling twice to get 2d4 to 4d4, you roll a total of 5d4 for a critical hit. If the attack roll of any missile is a 1, all missiles miss their target and blow up in your face, dealing 1 force damage to you per missile. So if you crit fail, it is a blow up in your face. When you cast this spell using a spell of 2nd level or higher, it creates 1 more dart, and the royalty component increases by 1 GP for each slot above 1st level. So this is an interesting concept that I like for the Acquisition Incorporated world. It is a royalty component because you are using Jim's named magic missile, so you must pay 1 gold piece in a royalty for using Jim's name. And if you cast it for higher slots, it's an additional gold piece per use. So that's the only real detriment to this spell, is potentially early on it might be very costly for you to use this spell because it's going to blow through your gold pieces. But overall, I like it. Again, as I've stated many times on the channel, I like attack roll spells better than I like saving throw based spells, because I feel like if I fail with an attack roll spell, that's on me, whereas the saving throw DC, I don't have any control on that. That's up to the DM. If I fail an attack roll, I feel like, again, that's me and my dice failing. Plus, there are other things. It's an attack roll, so there are other abilities that could improve it, like a Bard's Inspiration or Advantage could come into play, things like that. And again, I just like the idea of doing this. And I guess it's each dart make a ranged attack roll for each missile. So what's interesting is if any attack roll for a missile is a 1, all of them miss their target and blow up in your face. So that would be really interesting. If you hit for the first 2 and miss for the 3rd one, then they all blow up in your face, even though I guess they're all striking simultaneously. So that's how that works. Number 10. I really like Armor of Agathys. I haven't played an Oath of Conquest Paladin, so I don't really know how well it works on them, but I feel like they have the benefit of, still being a Paladin, heavy armor, all that good stuff. So this lasts for an hour, non-concentration, which is nice. And it gives you 5 temporary hit points for the duration of that hour. If a creature hits you with a melee attack while you have those hit points, they take 5 cold damage. If you cast it from a higher level slot, the temporary hit points go up by 5, as does the damage. So the benefit here for you is to find ways to reduce the damage, so you maintain those temporary hit points as long as you can. So each time you're hit, which I want to point out that if you have 10 temporary hit points and somebody hits you for 1 point of damage, they take 10 cold damage. If somebody hits you for another 2, that person still takes 10 cold damage. So if you can find a way to extend how long you keep those temporary hit points, that's good, whether it be through reducing the damage with other means or whatever you can do to maintain those temporary hit points. Again, I have not had a chance to do it. I guess I like this. I like Ice Knife. Maybe I'm really designed. I really want to play a really good cold themed character, and I've yet to be able to do that. So maybe that's something I'll look forward to in the future. Number 9. So if you're unfamiliar with sleep, it lasts for a minute non-concentration. It's a range of 90 feet, and you pick a spot within that range, and then in a 20-foot, creatures within 20 feet of that point that you choose are affected in increasing hit point order. Starting with the creature that has the lowest hit points, each creature is affected by it falls unconscious. You roll 5d8, and that's the number of hit points you can affect. So minimum of 5, maximum of 40, and then it counts down from there. So if one person has 5 hit points, you've got 35 left, and you go through there. One thing I continually forget that makes sleep even better is it's creatures within 20 feet of a point you choose within range are, I think that means that it's the hit points of the creatures you pick, if I'm understanding that correctly. The undead creatures immune to being charmed aren't affected by this spell. It also doesn't work on elves or half-elves because they are immune to magical sleep. Creatures within 20 feet of a point you choose within range are affected in ascending order. No, so if I'm reading that correctly, it's just... Someone told me that you choose the creatures. Starting with the creature that has the lowest current hit points, each creature affected by the spell falls unconscious. And then it takes either they take damage or someone uses their action to wake them up. Yeah, so that's how that works. So I don't think you get to choose the creatures affected by this. That's how I read it. Is how many creatures this spell can affect. Creatures within 20 feet of a point you choose within range of a point you choose within range. Yeah, so someone told me that you get to pick the creatures that are affected by sleep. I don't read it that way. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Anyway, the reason I put this on this list is I just ran over the weekend while on vacation. A couple nights I ran a family game of D&D, and they are level 4. And my uncle was a bard, and he ended 3 fights without them ever starting with sleep. They were fighting goblins, hobgoblins, and so on, and 3 of those fights, he used sleep and shut the entire fight down by knocking the entire group of enemies out, and then the party summarily destroyed them. Again, it's useful when creatures have low hit points. When you get to higher level, it's not as useful. Another benefit of it is when you upcast it, you add 2d8, so at second level sleep is 7d8 instead of 5, and so on and so forth, rather than only going up by a single d8 like most other spells would. Number 8. The few smite spells, in my opinion, that paladins get access to that's actually pretty useful and kind of maintains its usefulness throughout the entirety as a paladin. Even if you're higher level, this can still be useful. The only downside is fear is relatively, there's a bunch of creatures that are immune to fear, but if not, this can be pretty powerful. So it is a smite spell. It's accessible by paladins and hexblades. It's a bonus action to cast, concentration for a minute. And when you hit with a melee attack during the spell's duration, your attack deals an extra 1d6 psychic damage. Additionally, if the target is a creature, it must make, so it can work against objects by that means. If it's a creature, they must make a wisdom saving throw or be frightened until the spell ends. So if I hit somebody with this and they are able to be frightened, they must make a wisdom saving throw when I first strike them. And then if they fail, they are continue to be frightened of me until the end of the spell. It doesn't, like, at the end of their turn, they don't get to make a save. They have to choose to use an action to try and make it, but it is a wisdom check, not a saving throw. So if they are proficient in wisdom saves, the proficiency doesn't matter. It's just a straight wisdom check, so aka their wisdom modifier plus a d20 roll to see if they can steal their resolve and end the spell. So it is psychic damage, again, limited resistances on that, and then they are frightened of you until the spell ends, which is concentration for a minute, which means you're going to have attack rolls, or they're going to have disadvantage on attack rolls against you, so they may not be able to end it. And then again, as an action, they can use their whole action to try to break it, but then only making a check. It's very rare that spells out there require a check to overcome, which this is one of the few examples of that, which is why I think that, again, if a creature isn't immune to fear, this can be useful all the way up towards the end of the campaign. This and Thunderous Smite, but I put Wrathful Smite because I like the fear effect on it, which again, super powerful at low levels. Number 7. Right up there alongside Detect Magic for usefulness, I'll also say is Identify. It is a 1 minute casting time normally, which is kind of a bummer because you can't do it in combat, but it is a ritual, so that benefits you being able to take 11 minutes to cast it outside of combat. The other downside is it does require a pearl worth 100 gold pieces to be able to use it, but that is not consumed, so once you have that pearl, you can use this spell consistently. And then you touch an object, and basically you learn its properties, how to use them, whether it requires attunement to use, and how many charges it has, if any. This is when you don't think you have enough time to take a short rest to identify an item. This will allow you to do it in either a minute or 11 minutes, depending on the time frame. The reason I say, so more often than not, people will say if you have 10 minutes, you have an hour. Well, the only upside to this is for each time when you go to identify an item over a short rest, it is a whole short rest to identify a singular item, and then a whole nother short rest after that to attune to it. Whereas if you have multiple items, say you have 3 or 5 items, you could take less than a singular short rest to identify all of them, and then only people who want to attune to it will need the short rest after that, limiting the time. If you touch a creature as well, you can learn what spells, if any, are currently affecting them. This can be a benefit for if you have someone captured and you want to know if they have any defensive magics. You can touch them and say, okay, this person has, glibness. Don't trust them. They can lie and we'll never know. Or if you have an ally here you're not sure is acting funky, you could touch them and be like, oh, hang on. Our ally's under the effects of the suggestion spell. Maybe we can dispel it and then move on. And it also says you get to learn if the item was created by a spell, you get to learn which spell created it. I don't know if that'll be too useful, but I'm sure it has potential uses, and someone has an example of when that happened. Again, Identify, very useful. I wish it was, I feel like because it's so limited and it's Bard, Wizard, and Artificer, as well as a couple of, the clerics who get access to it are better because it's always prepared for them and they can use that as a ritual to cast it. For Wizards, that's the same kind of a thing, but for Bards, it's kind of a bummer because you have to choose it as a spell known, even though you can cast it as a ritual. And I don't remember Artificer off the top of my head, but that's an option as well. Again, Scrolls of Identify would be a thing, kind of similar to what you see in a bunch of video games, but again, I like Identify. Number 6. Healing Word. As far as healing spells go, I think this is one of the best ones. Obviously, another good contender would be Goodberry, because for a first level casting, you can get a maximum or a guaranteed 10 hit points healed with a Goodberry, plus the out of combat uses. But I like Healing Word because it's one of the most useful bonus action spells out there. Because as a bonus action out to a range of 60 feet, you can heal somebody for a D4 plus your spellcasting ability modifier. Obviously, it doesn't work on undead or constructs, and each additional casting above it adds a D4. This is your quintessential, we're in combat, things are rough, I still need to be attacking and doing damage, but I also want to get you back up off the ground. Let me use a bonus action real quick to pop you up. Again, another huge contender for boomeranging. That's where someone goes down to 0 hit points, pops back up, goes back down to 0. That's a whole other issue that I've discussed in other aspects on the channel, but it's a great use of a spell. Bard, Cleric, and Druid have access to this, so this is the classes that typically have access to healing. I would love to see this on a Paladin as well. Also, I feel like an Artificer, it's only on the Alchemist. I feel like a general Artificer, this could be useful. But again, I would give it to Paladin and Ranger as well, since they have access to healing magics. I don't know why they wouldn't have access to this particular spell, but so it is. Yeah, I really like it. It's useful. It also is nice that they don't have to be conscious to hear your healing word to bring them up, whatever the hit points you roll. Number 5. Heading back to Elemental Evil or Xanathar's Guide would be Absorb Elements, one of the very powerful reaction-based spells that's out there. So it is a reaction, and the reaction is when you take acid, cold, fire, lightning, or thunder damage. And what this does is it's going to give you resistance to that damage, aka whatever that damage would be, you cut in half until the start of your next turn. So this can actually be useful because it can apply to multiple effects if there are multiple creatures dealing damage to you. But let's see, you have resistance to the triggering damage type. So if you get hit with acid and cast this and then get hit with fire, it doesn't work for you. But you also, at the first time you hit with a melee attack on your next turn, you deal a d6 of the triggering type of damage, then the spell ends. So again, for that example, if you get hit with acid damage and you use this to reduce it by half, when you attack for the first time on your next turn, you'll deal an extra d6 of acid damage. You can choose to upcast this, increasing the d6s of the significant damage. I'll be honest with you, I'd say once in my entire time of having access to the spell across all creatures was I actually able to utilize this, because more often than not, when someone deals the damage type to you, if it's a monster, they're also immune to it, right? If a red dragon breathes fire on you and you use Absorb Elements to cut that damage in half, well, you're not dealing fire damage back to the red dragon because they're immune. It is also usable by the Druid, Ranger, Sorcerer, Wizard, and Artificer. Once again, I feel like this could be something that you could add to the Warlock spell list, and it wouldn't be a bad idea. Again, I don't know why this is limited to what it is and why, say, Druids have it, but Clerics don't, or why Bards don't have it. But I do think Warlock it seems like an oversight to not have this on the Warlock list. Number 4. One of the most powerful buff spells out there is Bless. This is an action concentration for a minute that lasts, it goes out onto 3 different creatures of your choice, which is nice in a range of 30 feet. They also don't need to stay within 30 feet of you to maintain that benefit, and this adds a d4 to any attack roll or saving throw they make as long as you are concentrating on it. For each additional level you cast it up, it adds 1 additional creature to it, and that's pretty powerful because there's not a ton of ways to boost saving throws. You can get resistance through Absorb Elements like I just talked about, but this can also reduce or increase your ability to save that. So if you combine successfully saving on a elemental damage based spell, then that cuts the damage in half if it's half on a success. And then if you have resistance from absorb elements, that will also cut it in half again. So Blessed is very powerful. I think it's better to be cast by a cleric than a paladin because they have access to more spell slots, but it is usable by paladin as well. I also feel like you could put this on a druid too, and I wouldn't think it's too weird. I know they're trying to go for the divine thing, but I feel like in my mind, it could work for certain artificers as well as for druids. But I don't know. Let me know your thoughts. Number 3. Well, if you need to attack the darkness, there's only one spell to do that, and that is good old Magic Missile. This spell is invaluable in most scenarios because it is an action out to 120 feet and it unerringly hits. It does 1d4 plus 1 force damage to a target. The darts all strike simultaneously, and you can direct them to hit one creature or several. And what's interesting is you only, which I've learned from a ton of people yelling at me on YouTube, that you only make one die roll. So a dart deals 1d4 plus 1 points of force damage, and basically you make one roll. You roll a d4, you add plus 1 to it, so if you roll a 4, it's 5, and then that just hits 3 creatures simultaneously. It's only one roll. You don't roll a d4 plus 1, a d4 plus 1, and a d4 plus 1. It's just one singular roll, which is important because certain things boost Magic Missile, or certain things can boost the damage that you deal, and that would apply to all of them. For example, an Evocation Wizard adds their intelligence modifier to any evocation spell damage they do. Well, that would add it to this, which would be applied to all missiles. Also, the benefit is for each second level or higher spell you use, you add 1 missile to it. So it's just adding to the damage. And this is pretty much consistent damage that you can bank on. One thing to consider, it only allows you to target creatures. It does not allow you to target objects, which may or may not be useful to you. And it is usable by the Sorcerer, Wizard, and then Arcana Domain Cleric, which is nice to have this on a Cleric. Again, why is it not on the Artificer? I feel like it fits there. I also feel like it could fit on the Warlock, because if you're going to kind of go with this idea of arcane casters, why do they keep leaving Warlock out? I don't know. Let me know your thoughts as well. And again, obviously you can stack up crazy amounts of damage if you build the right build, which maybe I'll make a build video on like the most Magic Missile damage, which I think has been done by a ton of other creators, but why not? Number 2. Shield. If you are a wizard, this is your best friend, but if you happen to be one of the other classes that has access to it, you know how useful and how powerful a +5 to your AC is. It's a reaction when you are hit by a target or the Magic Missile spell, or attack, or targeted by Magic Missile. It makes you flat out immune to Magic Missile, which is nice because, as we said, it pretty much hits unerringly. And this is one of the few ways to turn a guaranteed attack into a miss. Still doesn't do anything against critical hits, though. Sorcerer, Wizard, again, feel like it could be fit to the Warlock as well. It obviously can be for Hexblade Warlocks, Artillerist, Artificers, and Battlesmith Artificers. It's interesting that 2 of them both get access to it. Again, if you have access to Shield and you can get it, whether you're an Eldritch Knight or maybe as an Arcane Trickster, this will be extremely beneficial to boost your AC to even higher levels. Again, if you have Shield and you can get access to it, there's really no reason not to. Number 1. Surprising no one, Find Familiar is number 1. It's one of the most useful and versatile spells out there because it just lets you do so much. Having another figure on the battlefield that is within your control that can do a variety of different things. It has a bunch of different forms. The go-to is Owl for its ability to fly in, do what it needs to do, and fly away without provoking attacks of opportunity. You can see through its eyes, and having access to possibly dark vision and other senses you wouldn't normally have access to. It rolls its own initiative and acts on its own turn. Everyone I know rolls that they go at the same turn just because it's that much easier. It can attack, but it can do other actions. The primary one people use more often than not is Help, so it can provide advantage on an attack roll. This is very useful for if you're a class that does attacks. You can have this thing fly in, grant you advantage, and then you attack with advantage. And if it's an owl, it can then fly away, not provoking attacks of opportunity. It can also be something that maybe you leave in so that it can take an attack, so that the DM wastes a whole attack action, or a whole action, or a singular attack, just trying to kill off your 1 HP creature, which saves you from taking that attack as well. Again, you can communicate telepathically. It's great for recon purposes. You can dismiss it into its other plane and then bring it back to you if it's far away. That's an option you have. And another really powerful option is you can deliver touch spells through it as if you had cast it from there. So if it's within 100 feet, you can use it can use its reaction to deliver a touch spell when you cast it. Again, the benefit of that is if you happen to have access to this on another class that can heal, like say someone like a wizard, somebody that has, you can turn something like a Cure Wounds into a ranged spell by having this fly out there. So that is my top 15 first level spells. There's obviously a ton of contenders that could have been put on this list. I'm sure you'll all tell me them in the comments down below. I really enjoyed doing this. I love spellcasting, I love spellcasters, and I like mixing and matching different spell builds. Maybe I'll come up with an interesting concept for that ice-themed character, who knows? Let me know your top 10 or even your top 15 first level spells in the comments down below. And I would like to thank my patrons as well on Patreon for continuing to support the channel. There's been a nice increase in those as well, so more fun stuff can come to you on the channel, and maybe I can do things to increase my camera quality even further. Sounds like the audio's better, and I think the camera looks better, but also let me know your thoughts on that in the comments down below. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.